Hi, I'm Mary Elizabeth Williams. Welcome to Patient. I'm really excited. We're having a very different kind of episode today because my guest is Erin MacLeod. She is a writer for places like The Guardian, The New York Times, The Globe and Mail, Rolling Stone. Her Substack, which you should be following and subscribe to, is called Touch of All Right. She's got a YouTube channel called Erin Explains, in which she explains things. And she's also a college English literature teacher in Montreal. Erin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Erin, I want to get straight into what it was that brought me to you. It was a post you did back in November about something about yourself that I only recently even discovered was a thing. Tell
Mhm.
me a little bit about aphantasia.
Well, it's quite simply a lack of visualization. So I guess I would consider myself a non-visualizer, i.e., in my mind, when I think of things, they are not images. I guess I found out about this because I never thought that it was even a thing. I was just living my life. And then because I do teach literature to college students, literature and composition, I was at it was sort of a workshop for teachers and sort of talking about how to encourage the joy of reading in our students. And the fellow colleague that was running the workshop started talking about imagery and an activity with students to have them visualize elements of whether it was a poem or story, etc. And then we were to report back to our little group about the experience of the visualization. And, people were talking about how they imagined these things in their mind. And I just made a comment about, well, I don't really imagine actual pictures, but, from a figurative perspective. And people looked at me like, what do you mean you don't imagine pictures? And I said, well, so when you close your eyes, you see like pictures? And it was this moment where I realized that there was something different happening in other people's minds that wasn't happening in my mind at all. And then I looked it up, of course, online. This happened about, I guess, might be 15 years ago now. And so I looked it up, and there was an article in the New York Times about this thing called aphantasia. And, I went in this, as you do, this internet rabbit hole, looking up as much information that I could possibly find about this thing. And this scholar who had done some research on people who don't possess this visual imagery. And it was kind of overwhelming to me at the time to realize that this was something that I had never really known that was something that I had or that I didn't have, I guess.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me because I think about that. I think about the ways in which we all kind of grow up assuming that our brains work like everybody else's. Like if you ask me today, do my daughters who are in their 20s
Mhm.
see pictures in their minds? I don't think I could tell you.
Exactly.
It's not a
It's
question that comes up.
no. And so it's just this kind of assumption that I had about myself and about other people throughout my life, and just how, your mind fills in the blanks when people talk about, imagining things or, picture yourself on a boat on a river, those kinds of imagery in songs and in books and in poems. I didn't see them as being, you know, things that were actual pictures. I appreciated them, but they didn't conjure up any kind of imagery in my mind.
I want to ask you that. So when someone sings, picture yourself on a boat in a river, what then happens in your brain. Do you think, oh, do you just go, that sounds nice? Or what happens in your mind when you hear that phrase?
Well, I think it's kind of there's sort of two things that are happening is that I think that I focus more on the the meaning of the phrase, maybe. I was talking to a friend of mine, my friend Ryan, who we do the Erin Explains YouTube channel together, us kind of having conversations about things. And he is the opposite. He is a hyper phantasic. He has the ability to, as he has mentioned to me as a child, he would, record the audio of TV shows and put it in his Walkman and listen to it, under the covers in bed as a kid. And he could imagine all of the pictures from the movie, basically run the movie back, run the TV show back in his head, which seems kind of cool, but totally outside of my personal comprehension. But when we were talking about it, I kind of realized that what happens is it's almost like the message of something or the information, the content of the phrase or the message has like a direct line to my brain, and the image, it kind of just surpasses that. Whereas for him, he runs headlong into the image before he gets to the kind of interpretation that he might have of that. So I think that that might be kind of what how I would describe what happens in my mind is that I'm immediately wrestling with the words. I'm not really getting anything in between myself and the language, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about that, I think about when I hear people describe having synesthesia, and
Yes.
I don't see colors when you tell me a number. I don't have the same
Mhm.
kind of tactile experience of certain things because that's not how my brain works. Or, just really just a handful of years ago, I have a friend who is trilingual. She was raised by immigrants in New York City. She now lives in France. And I said to her, so when you're thinking, what language do you think in? Or does it depend on where you are? And she said, well, I don't think in any language. And I went, what do you mean? She doesn't think in words. And
Yeah.
it turns out actually only about 25% of people only have an inner monologue, like
Hmm.
only think in words. And I never knew that. And I think understanding that our brains all work differently and that the
Exactly.
way that we think is different helps us have a little bit more empathy for our experiences of the world and how we're
Yeah.
and how we're experiencing and interpreting things inside our heads.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I found was interesting about the recent article, which kind of brought up all these discussions about aphantasia in the New Yorker that came out around November of last year, was that it talked about how people with aphantasia are less likely to hold grudges. And I thought that was kind of interesting because this idea that memory and the way we kind of hold on to things in our mind happens differently if you have aphantasia. And I think that for me, when I have, I always say that the memories that I have, they could just as easily have happened to someone else. Like I know that they happened, but they don't have kind of a visual embodied element for me. Like I know that I lived in Ethiopia for a time. I lived in Jamaica for a time. I lived in Costa Rica for a time. But I can't really put myself back in those places. I sort of have to access them in other ways, whether that's through photographs, through reading about them, through talking about it with other people. So I guess that sense of, my ability to connect really is based on communications with other people and being able to sort of, I guess, bring forth those kinds of memories in a way that is relational as opposed to something that I can, sort of close my eyes and just imagine. And so I think for me, what I appreciate about this is that it means that I place great value on, the connections throughout my life and through the different places where I've been, because if I am not really maintaining those connections, I can't just conjure them up in the way that I understand that other people are able to do.
And even then, though, it's so interesting because, of course, we know that memory is very plastic.
Yes.
And we know that even someone who has the same sort of memory that I do and has the same sort of way of thinking that I do,
Hmm.
we can be like, you sat down at that restaurant and I can just picture you eating that French toast. And
Yes.
the person will say like, I hate French toast. I've never eaten French toast in my life. And it's like, but I can see it. I can see
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
in my mind. Like
Exactly.
it's still all very unreliable. I have like a bajillion questions about all of this because
Mhm.
I've heard like aphantasia, it literally means see, like it's what you see.
Yeah.
How does that then translate to other kinds of perceptions? Can you call up a scent? Can you call up a tactile? If I said, picture yourself petting your favorite cat, do you feel the cat? If I
Mm.
said, you're cut grass, what happens in your mind?
I think that what I have is I can't, there's the one thing I would say is that I have sort of a visceral experience with regards to taste. Like there's this wonderful writer, Marlon James, who won the Booker Prize for A Brief History of Seven Killings. In that book, some of his description of 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 quite disgusting sense experiences, smells, and tastes. Like I can think of them now and it makes me want to gag,
Uh-huh.
because of the way that he has described them in the book. And I also remember being a teenager and reading Jack Kerouac. And Jack Kerouac writes about ice cold water and baked beans, cheddar cheese, and half stale bread. And that I remember just feeling like I wanted to eat those things,
Hmm.
and I never really liked baked beans until I read Jack Kerouac and his description of the taste of that particular meal. I mean, I remember nothing else about On the Road other
Mm.
than sort of the basics about what
Right.
it's about, but I remember that. I remember the ice cold water, the baked beans, the cheddar cheese, and the half stale bread. And it's just like it would make my mouth water just to think about it.
It's so interesting without being able to picture those things. Because it's so,
No.
like this is just so fascinating to me because it's like I can like when you say those things, I picture I have a very
Yeah.
specific type of bread. I have a very specific type of bowl of beans in my mind, and I can imagine the smell and the taste of them. But for you, you can access the taste. You can probably access like the savory experience of that, but not that. So I want to know also. So what does this mean then in terms of your dreams? You wrote about this in your Substack post, but I just think
Yeah.
it's so interesting then because obviously we all dream, but dreaming is a different kind of experience when you wake up in the morning.
Well, what's interesting, and this is something that I learned recently when reading about aphantasia, is that someone like an aphantasic, an aphant, whatever word is used to describe a person like myself, I can't voluntarily conjure up imagery, but there is a sense that when dreaming involuntarily, people who have aphantasia might access visuals. And though I can't remember accessing visuals in my dream, what I have is this kind of inability to, and I think maybe it's because the visuals might be there and I'm so not used to having visuals, it's almost like it's real life. Because, for instance, if I have a dream that says someone steals my laptop or someone has taken something of mine, laptop is a good example. I will have to get out of bed, go and touch the laptop to make sure that it's there because I'm so convinced that something has happened, that maybe the dream is just it's something that's actually occurred. And so if something very frightening happens, it's not enough for, me to wake up and my husband to say, it's okay. It just was a dream. Everything's fine. It takes a little bit more than just that. Like I need to do something to prove to myself that there was a divide between whatever that was and my actual life. And I think that maybe that kind of extreme reaction to dreams might be because I'm just really not used to having any visuals, and that involuntary visual imagery might just be incredibly intense.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I can get that. Now, I think a lot of people, when they think about when they're this is like it's only I think 1 to 4% of the population, like at most probably 4% of the population
Mhm.
has this. So a lot of people are probably learning about this for the first time. You only learned about this for the first time, fairly late in your life. So one of the good things about that is I think a lot of us don't have a lot of preconceptions about
No.
then what that would be. But when I think about, okay, the movie version of Wuthering Heights comes out. Everyone is losing their goddamn minds about it, right?
Yes.
I don't know if you've read the book or not, but you've read a lot of books in your life. But did you have like what is the experience of not of well, that's not what I pictured Kathy like? Because okay, Kathy has brown hair. You know
Yeah.
that Heathcliff is dark skinned. What is the disconnect when you've read something described
Mhm.
and then you see it visually presented in a way that is disconnected from that? What is that experience for you?
Well, firstly, I mean, my problems with the entirety of Emerald Fennell's work are
That's part
are
two of this
beyond are
conversation.
beyond the
Mm.
exactly. But what I will say is that idea of a movie version of a beloved book, I have never had a problem who with the person who is cast as the character. And what's interesting is that I found out that my aunt has aphantasia, and my aunt is over 80 years old, at Thanksgiving dinner last year because, of course, the article in the New Yorker had come out. And so I was talking a bit about it, and I made this exact comment. I said a really great example is that I've never really had a problem with whoever is cast in a movie version of a book. And my aunt said, well, neither have I. Because, I mean, whatever, they choose someone, and I don't know what they look like. And everyone else at the table, and of course it was Thanksgiving, so you've got a whole pile of people have said, well, what are you talking about? Of course you imagine what the main character looks like in your mind. And then, if they pick Leonardo DiCaprio and you do not picture Leonardo DiCaprio, then it's it kind of stinks to watch the movie. And my aunt said, no, I don't know. And I said,
Wow.
Auntie,
Yeah.
I think that you might have aphantasia. And she was really discombobulated. And then we had a couple of conversations after that, and she, read up on it a little bit and said, I think that this is the case, that because that has never really been an issue. I mean, I can have problems with casting. I can think that someone is well cast for a role, or a character. I can definitely think that, yeah, Margot Robbie, obviously terribly cast as Kathy, too old, blonde, just completely not really in keeping with what is described in the book, factually speaking. But, if it was, say they'd chosen Zendaya, or they'd chosen, I'm trying to think of another young actor that I really like, they'd chosen someone else. It really wouldn't have bothered me at all, except outside of what I think is just not in keeping with source material. But
Mhm.
it's not that I've envisioned what Heathcliff looks like. I
And
know Heathcliff is a racialized individual, but
yeah.
I'm not thinking, oh, well, it's definitely someone who looks like X actor or Y actor.
And you said in your post though that it makes it difficult, beyond difficult, to then enter the realm of fantasy.
Mm.
And I would imagine that that is because if you have not seen something
Mhm.
in real life, that then it's hard to then put that in the world that goes on in your mind when you're reading something.
Yes. I mean, I have two books as examples for this. One I read as a child, which was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle, and one I read as an adult in undergrad, which was Neuromancer by William Gibson. Both of those books I had a tremendously difficult time with because I had no real idea how to think about what was going on in those books. A Wrinkle in Time, they were in this like the tessellating machine or whatever. And I just was like, okay, I just would kind of flip through the pages, read the words. The words would kind of just sort of wash over me, and I'd get to the parts where I could understand the elements of the plot. The same with Neuromancer, when it was all about going inside the computer.
Hmm.
I just would sort of let the words just sort of wash over me, but I wouldn't get anything out of it. To the extent that I actually find some fantasy, Tolkien is a really good example because everybody says, oh, the Lord of the Rings movies. I find it almost anxiety inducing to read or watch the movies. Or the book, read the books or watch the movies because I just don't have any access to what's what's happening there. And I guess might say, "Oh, well, you've never been to Atlanta, Georgia, so how can you, isn't this kind of the same?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like maybe on a certain level, but the it's easier for me to think about human experience that where there are no creatures and there are no imaginary spaces and times, and I much prefer, and I even don't really like historical fiction a lot of the time, or period dramas or that kind of thing, as much as I like stuff that takes place in the 20th century, because if I'm just going to watch something to enjoy it, if there's a really important book that I really want to read, I've read some fantastic science fiction and I have read some fantasy like Ursula K. Le Guin, I love, but again, I've really made the decision to invest the time because it's so much harder
Yeah.
to do that. It's not enjoyable for me. It's not a, I don't read fantasy and in a way that I know some of my friends do, which is really because it's it allows them to relax. If I want to do that, I don't know, I'll read like true crime or romance or something like that. But the fantasy doesn't it's not enjoyable for me.
Because all women, we really do read true crime to relax.
Yeah.
You know what? That's just who we are. Deal with it, everyone.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one more thing because I think this is
Sure.
important to also mention. Obviously, this in no way inhibits you from being a creative person. You teach literature, you
No.
read books. The way that I found out about aphantasia was John Green tweeting about
Mhm.
it. Clearly people who have this can still create, imagine,
Mhm.
world build, tell stories.
Mhm.
It's not an inhibition in any way. Do you feel that there are misconceptions when people find out that you have this? Is there anything that they get wrong or that they don't understand that you can clear up right now?
I think just admitting that we might think differently. Like I have been in situations where people say, "Oh, come on, you can visualize it. Just close your eyes, just visualize it." And no, no, I can't. And then also I would say the the fact that someone couldn't be a visual artist. I mean, I have spoken to online, I've had conversations back and forth, and I've since, people have talked about this a little bit more. I've learned about artists and illustrators, graphic designers, writers of fantasy, people who love fantasy and are able to access it in different kind of ways that are not visual. I mean, I think that it's just these kinds of assumptions that we all have. And I also, since I found out about it, I also try to give both myself and everybody grace in terms of recognizing that we're probably thinking about things differently based on how our own minds work. And, we do talk about people being non-neurotypical, but I think maybe it's a good practice. I always think of, the UDL, Universal Design for Learning, that we're taught as teachers, to try to address as many different learning styles as possible in a single classroom or a single assessment. I kind of feel that that might be a good way of thinking about engaging with each other as human beings, starting from the position that we may have different ways of thinking about things and trying to appreciate that there's value, that I think it's absolutely amazing that my friend Ryan can envision all of these things in his head, and he thinks it's amazing that I can get directly to the message of a book, or like the concept of something, without that imagery getting in the way, as he puts it, So I think that there's different advantages and disadvantages from the ways that different people's brains work, and that we would do well to consider that whenever
Yeah,
we're in conversation with others.
I completely agree. Like I said, I think it's thinking about thinking and
Yes.
not just asking people what are you thinking, but how are you thinking?
Hmm.
And getting to that curiosity about what does it look like inside your mind when we're talking
Hmm.
about these things will help us understand, okay, this is maybe why you're approaching this differently or why you have a different perspective on something. And it's just different brains. It's just the way that different brains operate.
No,
Erin, this is fascinating. Thank you so much for
no
being
problem.
so open and generous about your experience. I feel like I've learned so much from you today. It's really
Thanks.
cool, and you've made me rethink the way my mind works and the way that everybody else around me, their mind works too. It's a really, really important, I think, important conversation to be having, and I hope this sparks more of that. So thank you for talking to me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I hope so too.
Thanks, Erin.